No, thanks so much. I'm really heartened to hear that the pizza will be delivered because we're going to be talking a little about Pizzagate. Well timed. And the different time that it's being delivered, we maybe were a victim, Summercon, of a vast conspiracy with the pizza time changing by an hour. But anyway, we'll keep that in mind. So thanks to everyone. I know I talked last year about the report from Iron Mountain, which was another conspiracy theory. We'll mention it briefly today. But we live in a society that is rife with a lot of conspiracy theories. You may detect sometimes me being critical of certain conspiracy theories, but I do want to say I'm not against all conspiracy theories. We certainly know Julius Caesar was murdered in 44 BC, and it looked like the senators conspired to carry it out, and things in history sometimes, work that way. But what I guess I'm trying to say is that you want conspiracy theories, as John says, that's true, and a lot of times we have some that have really gone off the rails, as you'll see, and see what you think. But one of the theories that came up in recent times, there's a lot of ones about music and musicians. And back in 1979, we had the band Supertramp, who did their album Breakfast in America. And people have been writing that they predicted 9/11, because if you see, they had the Twin Towers on their album cover, and they had a waitress who replaced the Statue of Liberty, and she's holding up orange juice next to the Twin Towers. And if you see here, they say there's the date 11/9. In most of the world, the calendar is the opposite. We say 9/11 in the United States, but most countries, the month comes and then the day. So they say these two things clearly signal 9/11. So we hear this a lot, and apparently the orange juice potentially splattering on the Twin Towers was a premonition of the destruction to come. So people come up with a lot of things. But it's true. Yes, the USA, even going back to our colonial days, we have a strong heritage of conspiracy theories. And I want to start off with Cotton Mather, who was a 17th, early 18th century preacher. His father was president of Harvard, Increase Mather. He was very angry because Harvard didn't make him the leader of the university. He played a big role in the Salem witch trials. And he had a lot of conspiracy theories. There's an aspect of his religious heritage that was very apocalyptic. He often predicted the end of the world, 1697, 1716. Then he moved it to 1717. Then he said it was going to happen in 1736. But Boston had a very bad earthquake in late 1727, and he then proclaimed, this is it. But he died a few months later, and he didn't really get to recalculate it. So maybe he did think it was still going to be 1736 on his deathbed. But I think Mather's a very interesting character because you see things in his thought. One of his big ideas, he wrote a book that was called Wonders of the Invisible World. And what he talked about in that book was this idea that Satan had largely left Europe because Europe became such a stronghold of Christianity, and Satan fled to the New World. And Mather claimed that Satan was now operating through the indigenous peoples, he would call them the heathen peoples. And he used this kind of justification to say that, the Puritans who had arrived were a people of God, but we were or surrounded by agents of Satan. So he kind of came up with this theory. And it's something that a lot of his theory focused then on outsiders to his community. But that was one of the interesting things about the Salem witch trials, where they went after a lot of their own people. And, you know, one of the things that happened, too, is they often found children who made accusations against oftentimes a lot of women, but there were also some men accused of witchcraft, and people were executed. It was a pretty brutal thing. And I admit this, people have an attitude, always trust children, they're innocent. But I don't know, I remember trying to get my school bus in first grade being bullied by some pretty brutal kids. So I don't know that we should just automatically trust children, but that was that was one of the things that Mather felt he had going for him, that he got people to...
Well, Jack, that's the old Neil Brennan joke. He says, as grown-up Catholic, I didn't get molested, but I did fuck a couple priests.
All right. Well, that's not part of my presentation. But anyway, so I bring up the early colonial history so that you have some perspective. These things go deep. But I think an important thing, a lot of people who write about conspiracy theories, one of the most famous people was a professor at Columbia, Richard Hofstadter, and he used to always emphasize that a lot of times it was very fringe people, very fringe right-wing people. But actually, I think in a lot of earlier American history, there was a lot of mainstream conspiracy theories. And just as an example, well, there's Cotton Mather, by the way, in Spider-Man, the character. He does become a villain. Some of you probably follow the comics and, see that. So what I wanted to say was, for instance, George Washington in 1774, just before the Revolution, he spoke of a regular systematic plan to make us tame and abject slaves. So Washington had this notion that the British monarchy and a certain amount of European elites were conspiring to really curtail the freedoms of people around the world. And then when Washington and John Adams, and they rose to power in the early republic, they were often in some terrible fights with Thomas Jefferson, who was in the other party. And again, they accused, the followers of Washington and Adams accused Jefferson of being a follower of the Illuminati, which was this group that was seen behind the French Revolution and a lot of radicalism around the world. And, this was a group that was founded by a gentleman named Adam Weishaupt, who was from Bavaria. It actually really disbanded in 1784, but lots of books were written about this conspiracy of the Illuminati, and we hear a lot about it today. Pat Robertson, the preacher, in 1991 did a book called The New World Order, and he talked about how the Illuminati was a satanic scheme, and it was very much the forces of Satan supported by the insider Illuminati against the Christians. And, this was a very big idea, a new world order. Of course, George Bush, the father, he used to say the terms a new world order, and there was lots of warnings about these were code words for the Illuminati. So people would hear this and it would really alarm them. But, the 19th century, there were a lot of conspiracies, some people say a lot of them surrounded, they said, Masons, Mormons, and Catholics. The Masons were the Freemasons, and they were seen as part of the revolutionary ideas and sometimes secular ideas. The Mormons developed their religion a lot in the 19th century, and there was a lot of hostility to them. And of course, the Catholics, tremendous amount of Irish immigration. There also was a lot of fear of what Lincoln would talk about, and this is why it's a kind of a mainstream theory. Lincoln would often talk about the slave power and its power, and slavery was maintained in the United States, but there often were very conspiratorial ideas about how it held its power. So that's why I'm sort of saying people who always write about conspiracy theories as fringe, there's a lot of cases where it was a lot more mainstream. And some of these things go pretty late into history. People forget this. The year before John F. Kennedy was elected president of the United States, Norman Vincent Peale, who Donald Trump has often said was his favorite preacher, but he often warned if Kennedy gets in, the Pope will be running America. And 40% of Americans in one poll in 1959 said they would not vote for a Catholic, even if they were from the same political party and they agreed with them politically, because the Pope would be running the country then. So, these things can be, very, very deep-seated theories. So going to the next slide, we have H.L. Mencken, and he talked a lot about how statesmen foment a lot of theories of enemies and conspiracies all the time. And this is one of his big statements on this. He said, the statesman becomes, in the last analysis, a mere witch hunter. So there we go, back to the Cotton Mather idea. But a glorified smeller and snooper, eternally chanting fee, fi, fo, fum. It's been so in the United States since the earliest days. The whole history of the country has been a history of melodramatic pursuits of horrendous monsters, most of them imaginary. The Redcoats, the Hessians, the Monocrats, again the Redcoats, the bank, the Catholics, Simon Legree, the slave power, Jeff Davis, Mormonism, Wall Street, the rum demon, John Bull, the hellhounds of plutocracy, the trust, General Whaler, Pancho Villa, German spies, hyphenates, the Kaiser, Bolshevism. The list might be lengthened indefinitely. A complete chronicle of the Republic could be written in terms of it, and without omitting a single important episode.
This guy didn't like anyone.
Yeah, he was a pretty ornery character, H.L. Mencken. But one thing I'll say about him, when it comes to these ideas of enemy formation. For instance, when the Cold War was coming to an end, even before that, last year I talked to the Summercon about Report from Iron Mountain. This was a report in 1967. It was a bunch of guys got together and made a fake report saying that U.S. elites were scared out of their minds that peace might break out. It was during the Vietnam War. And what would happen to American society if we weren't at war with somebody?
Guys.
Yeah. Well, what happened is you read this report. It is kind of funny because they have all these details. Every one of the people who participated in this report, they had to go for a medical exam. And everything was fine except there was an excess of uric acid in most of the participants. And people just read this thing very seriously. And this idea that the elites were tormented by the idea that peace might break out. A lot of people believed it, to the point where these guys were very upset because people then kept following the report. They came out and said, look, this was just a hoax we came up with. It was a satire. And Liberty Lobby kept publishing it. They took them to court. They had all the publications pulped, and they still keep reprinting it. In fact, you can buy it today on Amazon, and there's a lot of true believers, and there's even a new book about it.
Oh, wait, Jack. So when was this? Because when I heard about a report about Iron Mountain, I think about the not so conspiracy theory rumor that's been going around that the document storage and backup company Iron Mountain, for the first decade, had no actual facilities. They were storing boxes of people's documents in apartment buildings. And they were like, no, it's a secure offsite facility that you can't see. And eventually they started building them out, but for the first decade or so, like, they were just storing them anywhere that they could get the square footage.
Yes.
Yeah, so like, this is from the 50s?
No, 1967 they did this report, yeah. But the company, that company, for various times has flourished. Phil Tinline did this new book from last year, and he proclaimed it the hoax of the century. Some of you may dispute that, but it was a pretty incredible thing. But I'll say this idea that sometimes our elites have, that you have to have an enemy. Samuel P. Huntington, he was professor of political science at Harvard. He was a national security advisor to Jimmy Carter. He wrote this book right at the end of the Cold War called The Clash of Civilizations. And the article came out originally in 1993, but Huntington went on and on about how liberal democracies become flabby and undisciplined when they don't have an enemy.
I am not a liberal democracy.
Okay, there you go. He was very worried. And, he talked about how we would transition from the conflict with communism to conflicts. He thought we would have a lot of conflict with Islamic countries, but there'd be other rifts in the mix. And, he went on and on. But it's interesting, especially in his interviews, he really stressed this idea that you needed enemies. And so, in a way, this hoax was kind of forecasting, things to come. Just to move forward on a couple of other things. Some of these, you'll maybe have more familiarity with this. But Wall Street Journal very recently did an article on the rise of conspiracy physics. And there's a lot of groups. This woman, she's a theoretical physicist, Sabina Hassenfelder, and she's really down on string theory, which has been, very, very strong theory in physics. And she says string theory is not dead; it's undead, and now walks around like a zombie eating people's brains. And the physics community, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about physics right now. One thing that's provoked some recent ones, she has 1,720,000 subscribers to her page, and there's another guy named Professor Dave. I think he has 3.5 million. So a lot of people are following these physics debates. But one of the things that's come up is with string theory. You hear a lot about the Epstein files, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories about those. But Jeff Epstein invited a lot of the world's leading physicists to his island. And while I personally don't think there was anything of his more lurid sexual activities going on, and people could dispute that, but he would bring Stephen Hawking there. And I know from our department, physics, Lisa Randall, Harvard physics person. She was the most cited physicist in the world for over a 5-year period, and she was there, and she's having to deal with a lot of difficulties from people because she had a long-running correspondence with Jeff Epstein. But some of the physics conspiracy theorists talk about how Jeff Epstein was involved in plots to try to disrupt physics and not allow...
Well, he's well known to have invited the juggalos on the topic of magnets.
Okay.
How do they work?
Actually, I have been to Epstein Island. It is Little St. James, and it's...
That's not surprising.
So it's about a third of the way between St. Thomas and Lake St. John, and it's a great place to get a sunburn.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll keep that under advisement. All right.
It's a very nice island. What can I tell you?
Yeah. But one of the things that I want to say about conspiracy theories, when people come up with one, and the report from Iron Mountain kind of demonstrates that, it's very hard to then reel them back in. And this has become a significant problem for Donald Trump, with QAnon. Trump had often been relatively friendly, retweeted a lot of QAnon things. And they were one of the big architects of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, they were like, I can't believe it's not butter is not butter. That's insane.
Yeah, and they rose up. You know, part of it was John Podesta, who was a Democrat operative. Someone spearfished and got a lot of his documents, and thousands of them ended up on WikiLeaks. And built out of that, they started making the accusation, QAnon, that Hillary Clinton, I think she kind of had Anthony Weiner in it, and Podesta, who was a Democrat advisor, were running a child, trafficking ring out of a pizza restaurant in Washington, D.C. What was it? Comet Ping Pong Restaurant. And of course, a guy showed up with a gun to take down the place.
Yeah, he showed up with an assault rifle.
yeah. And the guy...
It was not a Derringer. He wasn't like, stick him up.
Yeah, he was loaded for bear, as they say. And his argument was, with the owner, and the owner says, listen, you keep saying we have a basement where all these children are being kept. We don't have a basement at all. Go and look. And I think the guy who came did feel a little bit remorse and sorrow, but of course by then he was arrested and in a lot of trouble. But this is the thing, I think Trump has had this problem where he ran with a lot of conspiracy theories with Epstein, with QAnon, and now some of the people who have been propagating the conspiracies are upset that he's not fulfilling, half the documents from Epstein files have not been released. Trump, really made a lot of loud efforts to say during the campaign that he was the one who was going to be transparent and release all these things, and then he somehow changed his mind. And while his administration often says a lot of the documents are just duplicates, it's, a thing that, has not been... good for Trump. It's cost him.
So I have an anecdotal point to this. When this breach happened, a good friend of mine was the security advisor person on the Hillary campaign, and I actually got called when the breach happened because they didn't have a contact for CrowdStrike or for Mandiant, and I had to put them in touch with them. So, before this had hit the air, and at the time, I was also the CISO of Fox News. So, if that breaks your brain a little bit, it's intentional because it's a weird world. Yes, that is my anecdotal point to that this it feels more like a conspiracy, and I can promise you, it was just incompetence.
So... Here during the lockdown, of course, during COVID time, and it's often big upheavals, wars, economic disruptions, something like this, a great public health crisis. It sometimes feeds the growth of conspiracy theories. But here's an example, of during COVID time, you see the protests. The lockdown is every pedophile's dream, child lives matter. So this theme really captured a lot of people. It was interesting, in early 2020, there was a poll that showed that only about 2% of Americans said they were familiar with QAnon. But by late 2020, there was even a poll showing that 30% said they agreed with a lot of their theories and things. So, it caught on. But you can see in COVID time...
I mean, who doesn't love pizza?
Yes, there you go, and you go.
And thanks to Bishop Fox.
Here you go.
For supplying pizza.
Yes, it's smart. Pizzagate is real. Do you even queue? Here's another example. So, these are very, profound things, and we'll turn to.
Am I the only one that's looking at this picture and was just thinking she's kind of cute? Right, insane, kind of cute.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't know. She looks pretty stern to me, but maybe that's your type, John.
I'm not saying that I would ask her to smile more, but you know.
Okay. All right. I don't want to go there.
All right.
But I want to just have a few reflections because I know the pizza's getting here. James Madison, our shortest president at 5 feet 4 inches, he did write this note where he said, "A popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives." And I think this would probably be a great frustration to him. As much as I explained to you, there were a lot of conspiracy theories swirling in his time.
Sure, he was great at karaoke and not good at writing. Yeah.
Okay. But
he did draft the Constitution, for those of you who...
Yeah. But I think we've got to see that there's, tough struggles ahead because some of the conspiracy theories have become so outlandish. QAnon with Pizzagate, one of their big theories was that these children, they not only were being sexually trafficked, they were being taken in for adrenochrome. I think there's also a new rock band from Oakland, 2017 punk rock band with that name, Adrenochrome. But the
that
idea
sounds exactly what a punk band from Oakland would be called.
Yeah, the idea is that Hillary and her minions, and Katy Perry was even named in one of the things, they were taking this...
The astronaut Katy Perry?
That's right. Adrenochrome was being taken from the brains of the children and then pumped into older people so that they could permanently stay young. And so these are the kinds of theories that come out there that are just so out there, and it's, a very frustrating thing. There were a lot of beliefs in the early post-war years that some of the conspiracy theories were going to go really into big decline. A lot of people said the GI Bill sent 2.8 million GIs to the colleges. We had a vast expansion of universities, and people were going to supposedly learn how to sift out what was true from what was fake. And, we had...
things like O.J. Simpson totally didn't kill his wife and a waiter?
All right, well, we can talk about that later on. But no, so, the question is, for a lot of people, very hard to think about, what a society can do to develop in its broader population. Madison talking about developing the knowledge and the critical tools that they can evaluate things. And, there was a lot of mockery of conspiracy theories in the universities to the point where sometimes I think academic people were so dismissive that it turned off a lot of the public. I remember G. William Domhoff at UC Santa Cruz. He studies elites and power. He's a sociologist and psychologist, and he would write a lot of books, Who Rules America, books like that. But he said, I'm very frustrated because I show the power networks and connections of people, and then a lot of mainstream liberal people in the universities dismiss it and say, that's a conspiracy theory. And he says, they bark it at you like they're just accusing you. Well, that's a communist argument. We can't hear that. And I think people just feel there's so much dismissiveness that they're not listening to them. I admit, the John Birch Society in the late 1950s, Robert Welch, he was a candy manufacturer, and he did a book about President Eisenhower called The Politician, and he said that Ike was part of a vast communist conspiracy. If not, he was a dupe of the communists. And I remember William F. Buckley, a fellow conservative, but he didn't buy it, that Eisenhower was this off. And he said, Well, Eisenhower was a golfer, and we all know that golfers cannot be communists. So he just completely dismissed it. But
Golf, a game that was designed that the exception was that everybody can play except for blacks and Jews.
Yeah, a lot of discrimination with golf. But that was Buckley's argument within the right, and he thought he really shut down the conspiracy theories. But now a lot of them are so back. There's a religious dimension with people like Pat Robertson. Pat's no longer with us, but his followers continue to distribute the New World Order. And it's very tenacious, a lot of these theories. And part of it is people don't trust our leaders, and they're very unhappy a lot of times about very real things. And so people are very susceptible to beliefs that, can be incredibly extreme.
But they're not necessarily conspiracy theories.
Yes.
All right, so a show of hands.
Okay.
Who heard when they were growing up that carrots make your eyesight better? Right, this is the thing that my grandmother believed emphatically. Carrots don't do shit for your eyesight. It turns out we invented radar, and we had to have a good answer for the Germans as to why we could figure out where their planes were. So we introduced a disinformation campaign that carrots make our pilots' eyesight better. Not everything is not a conspiracy theory. Some things are real. Like when I was growing up, at least in the 90s, the hacker scene.
Don't tell them.
Well,
We also want to get pizza.
I mean, I kind of have to tell them. I think they know now. But until the Snowden leaks had come out, it was a conspiracy theory that there's Echelon, the government's monitoring all the communications in and out of the country. They're using foreign it was a conspiracy theory, and then it turned out to be true.
You can't talk about any of this.
Okay.
Hey, stop.
All right.
Stop.
We've reached the end of time. I'll be around. People can ask questions. I'll be around. So happy to answer questions. We probably should have given you a little more time for participation.
No.
But I hope this overview was of some value.
Jack,
Even though
it was fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you.